Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Jessa MacLean from Blueprints for Disruption. Hey Jessa, thanks for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Marv. And it's Blueprints of Disruption. However, there was a big argument when we first launched on what it would be for or of. And I think I go between the two in my intros sometimes. So if I can do it, you could do it.
Thank you very much. Quick, change the notes, Martin, of. Never make that mistake again during the episode. Oh dear. So what was the inspiration for the show and the history of how you got it started?
Well, let's start with the history. I was approached by some folks who were already running a podcast, a very successful podcast, New Left Radio. And I was kind of shit disturbing within the political sphere at the time. And they thought that I would make a decent podcast host. I was very skeptical. I don't think anyone wants to hear me talk. My family hears me talk enough, but they were really encouraging. And so it was like, well, what are we going to talk about? And at the time I was burnt out, like exhausted from fighting within the political sphere. So we're talking about like party politics over here in Canada. We have the equivalent of the Labour Party on the left. And yeah, I had been spinning my wheels in these spaces, realizing I wasn't really being that effective. And I was traditionally an organizer, an activist before I got involved with all that nonsense. And so I wanted to do a show that encouraged people to kind of get up and start disrupting the status quo in ways that are more effective than I was doing. So I wanted to kind of call on all the people that I could think of that were willing to share their knowledge, their, failures, their successes, what works, what didn't work, so that people could see themselves too doing that work. Because I think a lot of people are frustrated with the world, but they don't know how to get in and where to start or what exactly to focus on. So I'd like to be that a bit of a stepping stone for folks, right? So you hear actual stories from activists and how they shape their organization, how they do their work, but then you'll also hear discussions on how power structures work so people can better dismantle them, disrupt them, do what they need there. So the motivation was definitely in getting more people to, take up the cause of, equity and a leftist movement.
Yeah. So you started the show then. I mean, where did the title Blueprints of Disruption come from then?
It was quite literally what I envisioned providing people. Here are the blueprints. Like, here's how you can build databases. Here's how you can stay safe as an activist. Here's how you can get the most political leverage for your cause. Here's how you can create networks so you can share the load. Here are the blueprints to disrupt capitalism. And the people I was working with just hated the name. Okay. It was up to me. They were very good at giving me complete creative control, but I guess it's a bit of a mouthful. And, people who are on the sidelines might be a little put off. It's a little forward, but I wanted people to know what they were getting into, right? We advocate for disruption, right?
Yep.
Sometimes confrontational tactics to get what needs to be done. Not all the time, but yeah, so that's the name. And like I said, I think I did in my first few intros call it for disruption, but that's certainly what it's become. Yeah. And as for names, the group that put on the show. So it's myself, my producer, Santiago Hilu Quintero, as well as Jay Woodruff. And we are the Rabble Rousers Cooperative. So, again, people know exactly what they're getting with our name. So the writing's on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, blueprints. That's like you said, it's like the basis on which things. That's how I see it. It's like this is the basis of where you build from. But when you talk about activism, I mean, I was going to say this later on. So, why would you say that what you were doing as an activist beforehand? Why would you say that you weren't getting very far? I mean, every step, whether it's a negative or positive, no matter what step, it's still a step sort of in the right direction, essentially, if you look at it, because if something goes wrong, it's something that you learn from. And if you make a tiny difference, then you've still made a tiny difference.
I appreciate you reminding me of that, because I do lose sight of that a lot. And you're right. As a community organizer, I made a lot of impact in my community. Yeah. Organizing around decent work and other issues. But when I felt like I was wasting my energy was in party politics. But you are right. I did make an impact there. It wasn't what I wanted, but I want it all, bread and roses, right? Yeah. But it was harmful to me. So I didn't know that I would focus on this, but I think the third episode is called Inside the NDP, and we created a mini series out of it. So even though I don't really want to wade into party politics anymore, I wasn't going to just hoard the knowledge that I had gained and that my comrades had gained and not do anything with it. So we created a series that explores different aspects of the NDP, because it really is the only electoral outlet for leftists, progressives, whatever you want to call it here in Canada. And, they've been pretty hostile to socialists. So it's a bit of a warning, but also the knowledge. So if people do want to wade into those spaces still and see what they can do there and make changes, then they will have tools. And other people who then maybe don't have the energy to spend in that will be encouraged to go elsewhere. But, I don't think I advocate for a complete abandonment of any political avenue, but I've sure been tired out by one. But yeah, we did turn it into a positive, because those are our most best performing episodes, are the looks inside the NDP. And I think we've done about 7 or 8 of them now. So yeah, I keep saying I don't want to talk about them anymore. And then I do. And I'm glad I did, right? Because we get the most messages from them as well, like appreciative of that knowledge and sharing our lived experience in a way.
That's good. So how do you choose the guest that you have on your show, and how do you choose the topics? But at the same time, I mean, a clever part to this is that you have a topic. It's like before we started officially recording, we were saying about an episode that jumped out to me of John Clark, and I found that when you had John Clark on the show, it perfectly matched a recent event in the case of the action that was going on just before in Canada, and you were sort of like with John, and you were looking at it in comparison to a similar action that took place in 1995. And that's really clever, where you have picked a perfect guest to discuss something that's of now, and looking at how there's a similarity to that. But also at the same time, when you were talking with John, you were saying how things have changed, some for the better and some for the worse. And so how do you go about that? That sounds like a lot of work.
It actually isn't a lot of work, because although there are some tangents that we go on throughout, like the 51 episodes, something will come up that I need to vent about, right? So I try to think of a comrade that would know maybe more than me, or at least, I would be able to have a fiery discussion with and call them in. But a lot of it is this really genuine journey with me from the start. And, we started with the We Keep Us Safe episode because I thought if I was going to encourage disruption, I should first teach people or provide the information for people to remain safe, right? It would be irresponsible for me. And other episodes you'll see not only tie to current events because I experience them and I have questions about them, but they are a continual path because although we try to answer questions in our episodes, we end up asking a lot at the end. We need to know more. And so my producer and I think of a question or just naturally come up with a question and try to figure out who could help us answer it. Sometimes it's just us dishing too. Like you just got to talk it out and figure it out for yourself. But a lot of the time, we're cognizant that we aren't experts in all of these fields. And thankfully, I've been politically involved for quite some time, like 20 years. And I know great people like John Clark and other folks. Most of my guests I've known previously. And so I know what their passions are. And then I know that they can speak really well to what we're looking to explore that week. And I've been lucky, it's hard. People don't have a lot of spare time to sit down for an hour, these activists anyway. So I'm, my producer tries to encourage me to do more solo episodes, but I have a bit of imposter syndrome. I'm sure I'm always looking for an expert, to validate me.
I can understand that because all my shows, I'm always talking with people. Well, most of the time, yes. But saying that, I mean, the guests that you get, they cover the whole spectrum of activism. So you get them from different levels. They do a different job within that world. Much as people on the outside might see it as, oh, it's just these people that get together, they do this, blah, 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 and they don't see how it's all planned and how how there's different people that do different roles. A lot of people just see it as, oh, it's just these people that are pissed off about this and that's it. Yeah, but there's a lot more to it than that. And you get all those people, those cogs in the wheel. You've got all of them there on your show.
Yeah, I did a lot of work as a volunteer coordinator in political spaces. And sometimes there's a real devaluement of all of those cogs. One person kind of gets to be the face, or maybe a few people get to be the face of a movement. They're the target. You can blame them. You can also reward them, with accolades. But in reality, it's also the grade 10 youths doing graphic design for an organization. It's the volunteer power that progressive movements have to rely on. And the best organizations out there, when we talk to them, are the ones that have a role for everyone. A task to fit all passions, ability levels. And it's those movements that are most successful because people feel like they are actually contributing. Of course, they don't get a lot of the glorification. So when I go to do shows, I definitely want to make sure that those people are recognized for those talents and to encourage people that when you get people that come on board and say they can do X, Y, and Z, let them. Yep. There's a real tendency for a lot of us and in all different walks of life to take control and not want to relinquish any of it and have trust issues and all of that. But the talent pool that exists in the grassroots is unmeasurable, right? If you look to even France, where, you had actual bricklayers building a wall in the middle of the street. There's a job for everyone in the movement, whatever your talent is.
Yeah, I mean, touching back on what I said about people having a misconception, there's also the misconception that the problem is that when something goes wrong, where people are, basically they're there and they're rallying against something, the only time when the people realize that these things happen, or most of the time, is when there's something that goes wrong and there's like a negative element that takes part, which is a shame, because a lot of the time people don't realize when a lot of these things are happening, because, like I mentioned, there's different cogwheels in this. So within each, you've got liaisons, for instance, because by law you have a right to be active against these things and to protest. And it's a legal right in most countries. In my country, in Canada, in America, in all these countries.
Well, that's getting a little sketchy now, but for now we have it.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. We've got a problem with the Labour Party who are trying to disown all the unions in the UK. That is wrong. But so you've got that. But in each of these organisations, there's a liaison there who liaises with, much as there's problems, in some, especially in America with the police or whatever, there's a liaison there, because then you have a back and forth between, so yes, you can protest, and the police are just there to make sure that nothing goes wrong or whatever, and that's it. And that's why you don't hear about most of them, is because nothing negative happens, and it's just like, we're protesting against this. There's not been a problem there. And that's the good side to it with all these cogwheels, because that is where it's worked. But people don't see those positive events where it happens and it's good.
Yeah, and I can understand how sometimes certain actions that are disruptive, one, get deliberately painted in a very negative light. That's definitely deliberate a lot of the times. But there is an argument to be had, though, that it is the more disruptive, sometimes seemingly negative actions that get people to look. But certainly, yeah, there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that make any of this happen. A good example for that is when a union transforms itself. We had a union here that for once went on a solidarity strike for another union. That doesn't happen very often over here in Canada. And for most people, they look at the one leader that stands there and makes that decision. But the reality is there has been a slew of work done from shop steward levels up, hard grassroots organizing work that lead to these moments. And a lot of, the time, that's what the episodes are about, is that kind of grassroots organizing, making connections, talking to people in effective ways, and that, make for those big historical moments that we get to talk to John Clark about, and who actually makes the decisions there.
So leading up to the actual making or recording the show, what sort of research do you do leading up to recording the show, and what sort of notes do you take?
It depends on the type of episode. So if it's an interview with an activist, I will pore over their work, their organization's work, their statements, and usually I'm already familiar with the issue that they're talking about. It's kind of why I want to talk to them. So, but I'll make sure I have at least a base knowledge. I had guests on from, I'm going to get their coalition wrong, but they were working on the decriminalization of sex work and had issued a 75-page paper that they sent to me. And it was important that I read that. There was no way I would have had the genuine and meaningful conversation I had with her if I hadn't been totally familiar with what they were doing, because I wasn't very versed on it. But then there's other episodes, like when I'm talking about the NDP or, abolishing the monarchy, things that I have an opinion on. I don't really make notes because I know what I'm going to say, but I do some research so that I can match some facts to back up my rants, to validate my opinion, but also to understand what the counter arguments that will likely exist, so we can address those before we ever have to hear them. So forming an argument so to speak. And yeah, I've got my Google Doc up so that me and my producer can see the notes together for the most part. But there's been a lot where I'm just like, we need to get in the studio. I need to talk about this now. And I have zero notes and zero prep, but like I'm upset, and we have some really personal ones where I'm in tears, or my producer has just come from something and he needed to just dish about it. And we hit the record button instead of just talking on the phone to one another. And those were important episodes for us. We weren't really concerned on how they would be received. It was almost like a therapy session for us. But like with anything you experience, you've got to know that other people are experiencing the same thing, the same emotions. And sometimes just saying it happened is enough for someone else to feel seen, or, you know.
Absolutely. So when you do the show then, so how is it recorded and edited? I mean, it sounds like just then that you rang your producer and it almost sounded like it was recorded on the phone.
No, we hop onto Riverside, which is the software we use, similar to Zoom, right? It's web-based and you can see one another. We usually use video for our YouTube channel. And most of the time, yes, I am lucky enough to just record a separate intro, let my producer know those two files are sitting there. He takes those separate tracks, does his magic with them, and we'll publish that episode. I've had to do a few myself where I did the sound editing because life happens, and it's really just the two of us there doing that work. So yep, we try to hit Monday mornings for our new episodes, but there have been times where we struggled to hit that mark. That episodes needed a little bit more TLC than we could handle. But yeah, that's how we do it.
So you're never too far ahead then with the shows that you recorded. You've not got like a couple on the back burner ready.
Oh, I'm not really consistent about anything. So there are times where I will have 5, 6 episodes in the can and I'll be like, sweet, we're good. And I'll go lax. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, really? I need an episode for Monday? What happened? Where did they all go? Okay, scramble. And so it's really been beneficial that I know a lot of the people that we've called in, so I can apologize for the last minute. Like, are you available now to talk about, that stuff you do? And so there's definitely been moments like that. Like Santiago, he knows if he gets a call late in the week and I'm like, hey, you want to jump in the studio? That means, I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't get a time nailed down, an interview booked in time. So, but some of our best episodes have come from that too, because then we get to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
But sometimes when you do that, I mean, so when you do record the chats, I'm guessing you've got bullet point notes as to points that you've got to hit. But for the most part, are you trying to be sort of open with wherever the conversation takes you, let it just go there?
Yeah, we're not very strict with keeping to our points. And Santiago and a lot of the people I work with just refuse to use my Google Docs. So I don't know what they're going to say. And that's not important. If it takes us on tangents, both of us have ADHD. We're both neurodivergent. And so we quite often end up on tangents. Some of those get edited out. Some of them make for great kind of clips on their own. We once went off on a complete tangent about a mayoral race that I don't even know how we got on the topic, but it was relevant. So we took it out and it was his own little mini episode. And we were so proud of ourselves for using our
initiative
inability to stay on track to gain more viewers. But it is, but sometimes you don't want to, especially when I have a genuine exploration to do, like with John Clark.
Yeah.
I had an idea, but I needed to know more. So he was going to take that wherever it went. And there's been a few guests like that. We did one on the kind of history of leftist struggles in Ontario. And I didn't know squat, even though I have a political science degree. this was stuff I did not really know about. And so we booked a professor, and I feel like he had just drafted a lecture for us, answering all the questions that I said. I try to send my guests as many questions as possible to make it, accessible. They can plan ahead, maybe allay the nerves a little. And he legit took the time, I feel, to write a very comprehensive lecture that, needed editing so it didn't sound like a lecture. But, he really did prepare. And so my notes, everything got answered in the questions that I had sent. So there was really no, pulling on my notes. I just leaned back and let him go.
Yeah, I had something very similar the show before recording this one. I started the show and then asked them the first question, or not the first question, but asked them about the first bullet point that I'd written down. And they proceeded in that answer to answer the first 4 bullet points. And I was like, okay, thank you very much. That makes my job a lot easier.
I know. And then you're like, what? I don't have to do a thing. Were they reading my notes, So
yeah, they must have.
Yeah, I like to talk, but I do like to learn too. So it's kind of finding that balance of interjecting when you need to, but not letting the guests lose their flow of, thoughts.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, that's my whole thing with this project that I'm doing here with Pods Like Us is, or what I've done. I've ended up learning more or getting more information coming into me because of this sudden open. Because when I first started doing it, I thought, I'll do the shows that I listen to. The music shows, the film shows, and all these sort of things. But then I thought, I could expand my knowledge through this and also speak with really interesting people like yourself in the process. And it's just making me more open to receiving this new information and giving me a fuller picture of what's going on around me.
And it gives your audience such a more eclectic collection of podcasts. And it reminds me of one that I haven't listened to yet, but I heard of a TikTok where she talks about it, and it's just info dumping. That's something that neurodivergent people do a lot. We get really excited and knowledgeable about a certain topic, and the floodgates open and blah, 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 it all comes out. All right. We don't even take a breath. Kids do that a lot too, right? And so that's what the episode is. It's just this open call. What do you want to info dump on? It can be the most random thing that's totally unconnected to anything we've done an episode on before. And I thought that's quite clever, because some people just like to soak up knowledge, right? It doesn't even matter. They don't have a niche. It's just anything and everything. They just can't get enough. So yeah, I imagine your show's good for people like that.
But I'm also introducing people to what these shows are about, in a sense, not just the behind the scenes and pulling away the curtain of, this is how the magic works behind the scenes. It's also, I like to think of it as a micro version of that person's show or those people's show, essentially, where I don't just talk about that. I'll try and pick something, 1 or 2 or 3 things to try and pull out the knowledge of those people, and it introduces people who might be looking for a show about these subjects, and they'll be like, okay, what do these people know? Always asking them this question: what will their answer be like? Will I like their answer, and will I like the way that they are as people?
You must listen to a lot of podcasts, though, because I was impressed, although I do research when I have guests on, that you were able to reference a few of the episodes there, and not just reference them, but have a knowledge of what I was trying to accomplish in them. And, that made me smile. That was nice. Because you do a lot of these, right? And that must take a lot of work to make sure you've got something clever to ask me.
Well, we're going to pull away the curtain here, but we spoke last week as well as all the other guests. So the 2 shows I've done previous to this, and then one I've got tomorrow night, they came from me. I'm putting a call out for guests. And so I've listened to 3 episodes of all of those shows among my other normal listening while I've been at work driving a van around for 5 night shifts.
Okay, so that's the secret though, right? You are playing that while you're driving, right?
Yes, and then I take notes as well, because I don't know if you've noticed, but I put a blog out and it
I did
includes
see that.
notes from shows that I've listened to, because I take notes.
I keep meaning to do, I like to write, and I keep meaning to do more of that, to kind of repurpose the content, and post it on the different social media that allow for more lengthier kind of reflections. Because sometimes I stop recording and I think of more questions that, that I'll then have to explore on a different episode, or a perspective I didn't get to share, a point of clarification, that writing a blog like that would give you the avenue for. It's just, I am not very disciplined. I'm working on that. And yeah, if anyone has advice there, but I got ADHD working against me there.
You'll get the email address later to send the advice to.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
But what was I going to say? The only negative about it is that my notes are taken by shall we say, an AI on a phone. I won't advertise. No advertising.
Does it do a good job, or do you find you got to go back and be like, I did not say that?
I do have to go back every now and again.
Yeah.
There's some difficult names or difficult words, and it will change it to something completely different. But the problem there is, I come back to it and I'll look and I'll think, what did I actually say there?
Trying to make sense of yourself. No one can do that.
Trying to make sense of the telephone's AI and what it thought I'd said.
It's the same with transcripts. Like the program that we use, Riverside, gives free transcription, but it is rough. And we do try to make our content as accessible as possible. Like everything we do is free. We do have a Patreon so folks can support it, but you don't get any extra content there because, I'm a socialist. I'm not going to put anything behind a paywall, especially information. But, yeah, it's a bit of a struggle sometimes to just make sure there's enough content to engage people.
I feel bad now because I've got a Patreon page. Yes. So
yeah. That wasn't to shame you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I mean, actually, my notes from last night include my dig at my employer about something. So, if truth be told, I'd love to be able to, just tell them to stuff it and give it all up.
There's a line in that song that I referenced, I think, before we started recording for real, where, you ain't done nothing if you ain't been called to red. And I'm going to forget the actual line, but it was, you always get this feedback when you do rabble rousing and activism, or same with you get tattoos, right? You'll never find a job, or, you hang out with those communists, you're going to get fired. And it's like, I'm a podcaster, right? This is my job. It doesn't pay, but, either way, there's nothing to lose here.
No, but it's a lot more fun doing podcasting than it is doing the work that I do. Although saying that, the positive to doing my work is that I'm in a van listening to really good podcasts
that give you all that material, right? To then do your passion.
Absolutely, the passion. So, show music, intro, outro. Yeah, I like the. Is the intro still the same, where you've got all these voices, sort of like just shouting these things, and yeah.
Well, if you've ever been to a march, at least in North America and South America, except obviously it would be in Spanish, the chant is, "This is what democracy looks like," and that is a reference to the fact that activism and rabble rousing and disrupting is actually democratic activity. It goes beyond the ballot. So it is still the same intro. I don't know if I'd ever be able to get rid of it. I've re-recorded my little blurb at the beginning where I try to, allow folks to know what they're getting into weekly. I'm never happy with that. I'm always listening back to myself going, I got to redo that again. I got to redo that again. But, I don't do that to my producer. I just got to stop listening to myself after a while. But yeah, that's, we thought a lot about that. We do want to incorporate more music though. We just don't know how yet.
Not that he's ever listening, but you could do with Zach Della Rocca or somebody doing the voiceover for you for the intro.
Oh, I'm in for that. Yeah, definitely.
I'll give him a shout.
Put in a good word for me.
Although his guitarist is easy to get hold of, I'll be honest.
Oh, well. My producer, Santiago, he is a musician. I'm not sure there's an instrument he doesn't play. So maybe we just get like a jam session going on for the next Zoom.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea. So yeah, show me, and the show logo as well. That's like a classic image, really, of lots of people there, and the flag, that's been. Is it a burnt flag?
It's waving. I don't think it's burning yet, yep. But it has that real, barricade vibe to it. A mix of different people. It's clear that are, rising up and headed towards something together. And yeah, it's just very demonstrative of our content. So we thought just by first glance, you would kind of know what you were getting into. Full disclosure.
But so what would you say then are episodes? I mean, you've been going for a long while now. So what would you say are episodes that have stood out to you over this time? That it's like I said to other people before, it's like picking a favorite child, really, which you can't really do. But are there some that really stand out to you as that was something really important or different?
There were probably there are two episodes that were really impactful. One was a very personal one for me, that the party that I referenced earlier in the episode, the political party, had kicked me out of the party and had, kind of launched a attack on me of sorts. And that's one of those episodes where I was just like, I need to get in the studio. I need to respond to this, because I'd actually been told not to make a public response. And so I did anything but. And when I listened back to that, it really hit me. There are points in the episode where I am upset. I think some of the sobs are edited out, but it was hard to get through. And listening back to it, though, had the opposite effect. I got really angry and empowered and a little nervous at airing it, but it by far exceeded my expectations. Like, people really resonated with it. And when I saw the numbers of the audience numbers for that compared to we're still a very small podcast, it was just, I felt really validated. So it really was like therapy for me that whole week that it aired, and I got to talk about it. But one that impacted our entire team was when we interviewed Indigenous land defenders from a movement we call Land Back. They were from 1492 Land Back Lane, specifically here in Ontario, trying to reclaim land that's set for development, like what land isn't. And what it was about that was, because we talk about activism and the movement, it was realizing how much heavy lifting and generational work and commitment and sacrifice Indigenous people have had to make to try to do the right thing, like to reclaim land so we can have clean drinking water. So we stop doing to it what we're doing to it. And they don't get the recognition, they don't get the help or the solidarity they deserve. And so there was a bit of guilt, that settler guilt that played in, but also it lit a fire in us to make more waves, to get more people to understand that they've got to do the work, right? You've got to get up and do something about it. So both of us, when I say that, my producer and I got on the phone after that and was just like, that really hit us. Like, that, it changed us. It changed how we saw what our role was, I think.
Yeah, well, the first one of those, I'd say that there's something about that where when somebody does a show like yours, where you are being so open, like you were hinting at, it's like a catharsis in a way. It's like you have to get this out of you, and then there's almost like within yourself a relief of I've got that
Absolutely.
out. I've got that out of me. But it's those sort of moments in these things, as with a lot of media, it's like, we were talking about songs. When people write songs that are like that, and it's honest and it's their emotion there in the song, that's when if you're the right sort of person to receive this and listen to this or get this, then that's when it hits you as a listener or as a person taking, watching, well, with a television program, with a film, with anything, that's where it makes the most impact.
Yeah. Yeah. We've experienced that a few times too. My producer had a really rough experience at a media event he was covering and how it related to his role as a journalist. And he just absolutely needed to explore that. He needed a friend to talk to, first of all. But from my experience with my episode, I knew, let's record this. If after the end, if we're done and you don't want this to see the light of day, by all means, we leave it. But we knew that many journalists, especially student journalists going through this process, were struggling with these same issues, these same hypocrisies and other barriers to their work, and so again, yeah, it wasn't worrying so much because sometimes you're worried about it tying into something current or being something that everybody wants to talk about or having a really high profile guest to make sure that you can up the audience numbers, right? But sometimes, yeah, you just need to tell really genuine stories that are unscripted and unexpected and see who connects with it. Someone will.
Absolutely. So I've put it. I don't know really how this activism, rights and wrongs. So that's essentially that probably goes hand in hand with the later one of general advice. What would you suggest to people if they are fighting for something? Are the basics of what they need to look at when they are fighting against something, or trying to actually make things better for people? Because that's essentially what people are doing. You're taking something that's wrong in the world and you're trying to make it better, essentially.
Yeah. So for first timers, rather than start anything new, I would the best advice is to find people already doing the work that you're, concerned about or passionate about and join up with them.
Yeah.
And especially if you're talking about climate activism, I think it can be really hard to know where to start. There's like pipelines, there's coal, there's the water, the air. So when I talked to activists, our most recent episode was with transit activists. And, I asked them, why transit? All the things you can fight for, healthcare, education, it was because they felt like it was an avenue to address the inequality that they saw, as well as climate action. And they had found that one kind of local niche where they could make impacts at the municipal level, at like our lowest government level, and do something. They weren't going to lower the emissions across the planet with this, but they were going to make an impact. And my advice to organizers out there, activists already doing that work, I got lots of it, but, to the most important one, I think, is to remain optimistic and to bring joy into your movement, because you need people to be sustained, and times are really scary, especially to the people who are fighting to make it better, right? You wouldn't do that if you didn't think things were dire, right? Spend your free time doing this work. So they need to be uplifted constantly. So find room in your budget, find room in your time, work it into your meetings if you have to, but like make sure you bring joy to these movements and to this work. And or else it won't last, you know? So also don't see yourself as solving any one of these problems yourself. I think the best advice I ever heard was you're just there to make impact, right? So anyone who's gardened will know that you can plant a few seeds. Some of them will not sprout, some of them will sprout, just kind of peter off, and some will absolutely thrive and fruit and flower and create their own seeds. And sometimes you won't even know. Like, let's just imagine you're gardening on the go. You don't know. You just have to know in your heart that some of them will sprout. Some of the things that you do will have incredible impact and reverberate generations. Some will do nothing, maybe, or feel like nothing. And that's okay. You just got to keep at it and know that, that is exponential, that one flower. Even if you grew one, that flower will grow more flowers. And that's the role you got to play.
Like I was saying earlier, when, in everything, there's always a positive to take away from everything. Even if you are learning from a negative, that's a positive that something's not happened the way that you thought it would. So you learn from that, and you, in the future, you try and alter things so it's different in the future. It's all a learning experience, and like I said, there's always positives there if you look for it.
Yeah, even I had a guest on who gave me a bit of a reality check because I can get frustrated with tactics that I feel like don't do anything. And I was talking about that. I try not to do that because I feel like all tactics have validity, or at least it's people trying.
Yep.
But I did get into that hole, and she reminded me, in this battle, it's a big one. You have to expect losses, right? I'm using scare quotes because, as Marv just explained, you need to find the positive in that. But expecting them is also part of that, right? Steeling yourself, being prepared to find the positive, and also acknowledge that it was a failure to be learned from. So sometimes we can get really reactionary to that, and I'm never doing that again. And that's really not the answer.
Yeah, but even I wish I'd have actually looked on my notes for something else. Because on the Womanica podcast, they were talking about somebody, and I can't remember who she was now, but she initially disagreed with, when she met with him, she disagreed with Malcolm X and certain things that he was saying. And then it turned out that after a while, she realized that some of the things that he was saying were right, but sometimes it takes time for you for people to realize these things. So you might not see how these things would work. You might look at them and go, oh, there's no way that's going to work. But from a different point of view, it is working because it's putting the point across there for people to see the actual truth behind what the inequality is. It's getting the inequality there for people to see that there is something wrong there that needs to be looked at the very least.
Yeah, and I think we underestimate what people are ready for as well, right? We discount some tactics because, maybe they're too disruptive, or you have an idea that's just too far left, we're just not ready for it. But a lot of the work is testing the waters, making space to make it okay, right? To make it palatable, to demand free education for everyone, or free transit and fully funded healthcare. If it's not safe to say it now, then make some space, right? Rather than waiting for the conditions to be right, or knowing that conditions are right, because, truly knowledgeable people know that they don't know things. And a lot of is trial and error. So sometimes it works, sometimes it's not. But yeah, it's really not all that productive to discount different avenues, different political levers to pull, because it's a litany of pressures that have to exist to get what we want, what we deserve, right? There is no one way of doing it. So that's why on Blueprints of Disruption, we have talked to so many different activists, like some that are solely focused on knowledge raising, others that, stand outside bad employers and name and shame them until they repay stolen wages, get really disruptive, people who are occupying land, even though there's a heavy police presence, people who build databases for volunteer groups to get better connected. So there's different ways to do things. And yeah, it's better to embrace all of that kind of rainbow of a coalition than to, think that the best way forward. But sometimes I forget that.
But so what sort of literature and media would you suggest to people if they were to look for something as an inspiration?
Well, I would start with the Communist Manifesto. I hate to be that person, but raising a working class consciousness is critical to a lot of work, right? It's like the one thing that'll allow us to work in the numbers that we need to accomplish things rather than fighting amongst ourselves. And sometimes it's getting back to those basics, that bit of theory. But, my literature collection would be considered highly radical, I think, to most, and maybe not the best referrals.
Well, the Karl Marx book, I mean, that am I really going to hit on this? Yeah. So the thing is there with that, where people might from the outside misunderstand, because they look at that and they see, the Russia that, they see Russia in the way that it became or whatever, and they thought, oh, and they have this thing where, Russia is based on all this. But the problem is with all politics, whoever gets in power somewhere, they find a way to manipulate, shall we say, in a way, because my argument with politics is all politicians get into power and make things better for themselves, essentially.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So whoever they are, for the most part, the millionaires that go in power anyway, and they will always manipulate things to make themselves, it's almost like they're sorting themselves. I'm going to use, this is my attempt at humor. They're making themselves a nice pension, shall we say, while they're in power. And that was the problem with how Stalin, Lenin, and all these people were using that. They ended up getting in power. And initially, they might have been sort of, to a degree, meaning everything that they'd said. Like all these politicians, to a degree, might mean everything that they said. But then when they get into power, what is it they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So they get the power, and that they then use that power to make themselves richer, because the rich will always try and make themselves rich. This is where the all inequality comes from. The rich will always make themselves rich by stealing away from the poor and making the poor that little bit less better off than they are. Wages will never go up, unfortunately, according to how inflation goes up. The only people's wages that go up are the people that actually make those decisions, or the people that are millionaires. That's what's wrong. It isn't the actual teachings or the writings of Karl Marx that are wrong. It's how it was used wrongly by those people that were in power and were saying, oh, it's based on this, where it wasn't really. They'd manipulated it and changed it.
Yeah, I think the most important part about reading Marx or reading, socialist theory is understanding that power imbalance that purposely exists under capitalism, and how you choose to use that knowledge and to use the ideas that if we like democracy, our workplaces should also be democratic. If we think that works for, something as large as a government, surely it should apply to our workplaces. So yeah, what anybody decides to do that in a system of government can be suspect. A lot of the structures that exist for politics are very colonial, very authoritarian. And so even good people that get into politics end up doing exactly what you're talking about, is like playing for the next 4 years or whatever your term limits are. And yeah, working for that pension, looking to not make too many waves because they need to be reelected because that is their job now. And, folks that make really big waves in politics often don't get hired very many places unless they're making waves for conservatives. So it's an ugly game, politics. And to use historical examples, as a reason not to explore a different way of structuring our society. Surely capitalism has endless examples of how it starves and degrades and exploits. So the few actors out there who have, used their authoritarian powers, like anything, like that's why we examine power structures. I think people would be shocked to know that even some really good organizations have really horrible structures that just like breed that same inequality that you're actually trying to fight. So part of the lesson of trying to organize is how to structure these spaces so that voices have equal weight and that your goals are just and you maintain a value system rather than playing into the game around you. But reading theory isn't necessary. You can learn a lot from people's lived experience, but I just use that as an example of at least one place to start.
And you touched on something else there where it made me think. Something that I find really irritating is looking at these organizations. You have charity organizations where the people in charge of the charities are millionaires being paid by the charity ridiculous money, and you think, or I think to myself, hold on, shouldn't most of that money that you're getting be going to that cause? I agree that you're doing a job, and okay, you get paid for doing that job. That, at a push, yeah, all your time spent managing that company or managing that charity or charitable organization. But why on earth are they getting paid that ridiculous an amount of money when that charity that they're supposed to be paying money out for is still screaming for money to do what it's supposed to be doing?
Yeah, there's some really bad examples of, progressive institutions not operating with the same values that they espouse. But on the flip side, we interviewed Paul Taylor of Food Share, and this man has gone on to start something called Evenings and Weekends. And it's a consulting firm for nonprofits, mostly, on how to just do things better. And, I applied for a job there. I'll be honest, I didn't get it, but they pay everyone the same wage. They have 4-day work week. They pay people for the interview that they're going to go on. And so not only do they consult to teach people how to, but they're living that truth. They're living that example or organizing that example of what they want to be, rather than just mimicking the systems they see around them and talking about a new game. They're doing that hard work of being those pioneers, so to speak, and even if it's hard on the bottom line, even if it makes things twice as hard because you have to navigate it for the first time rather than follow a bad model. But I have fun watching how they progress in the different initiatives that they have, because, that's what it's about, right? Finding a new way forward and trying to get some folks on board. I'm down with the 4-day work week.
I'd love to do a 4-day work week. I hate my 5 nights a week, I'll be honest.
Well, let me just say, sorry, one of the most that I should have mentioned, one of the most powerful things about the manifesto there, and we just kind of led to it with that answer, is human emancipation. We often have to do things with our body and our mind that we don't enjoy. And that's okay. Like, survival requires that. But to the extent that we experience it, like 8-hour days, 5 days a week, and that is like minimal, right? Like for most people, it's more than that. And that's not Right. That's not natural. We haven't structured ourselves properly if we're all spinning so many wheels and not really getting anywhere. So to hit on that, sometimes it's a double-edged sword, right? When you realize all the problems that are going on or the exploitation that exists under the system, that's a hard weight to hold. So yeah, the show tries to give people outlets to not just feel the doom and gloom, but to do something about it.
Well, the problem is that with that, employers and businesses can take advantage to a degree because, like I said, governments will always work towards the rich because they themselves are rich in themselves. So, in a lot of companies, when a lot of countries, when decisions are made, they will make them according to how it makes it better for the employer, not for the employee, to a degree. But that's the problem. So what happens there is the employees are paid such a low amount of money, and with the financial problems that the world as a whole at the moment is in, and people are screaming for more money. The people who are paid, the low paid, are screaming for more money because as their bills go up, their money isn't going up, which in itself causes a problem because then you have businesses where some people work 12-hour shifts nowadays. So you'll find people working 12-hour shifts. I do a 12.5-hour shift, 12 hours, 12 and a half. And because the money's so low paid, to be able to pay the bills, then you're going out for five times a week to do those hours, which then causes going to a completely different thing. It causes the mental and the instability of home life for these people because their life is all at work. They come home. There's no time at home during those 5 days a week, which back in the old days before, when people were only working shorter shifts and you had the 4-day week that we had in the 70s and the 80s for the most part, back then you had a better work-home life balance where relationships and family worked better. But now that's been pulled back because people are having to work more hours to get that more money because the money that they're getting paid, even though it looks better, it actually isn't.
Yeah, we did a mini series called Burnout, and we got there because so many people around us, particularly going through, COVID and all of its stressors, are burnt out, like this level of exhaustion and disconnect, and it manifests itself in so many different ways. I sat down to do our comrade Jay, he does those interviews with people talking about like what burns you out. And in the end, most people come to the reality that, it's not an inadequacy of yourself. It's the system that we live under that forces folks to be in this grind mode for so long and has strains on our relationships. There's kind of like a friendship recession that Santiago talks about that COVID has played into, but just so many other things like lack of free time, lack of third spaces, not home, not work, somewhere to gather. And those spaces are less and less. So a lot of times organizing and building community is just recreating those spaces. Like people try to think of like, how can I get the government to change this and that? And like some activism isn't always so complicated. Sometimes it's literally carving out a small space virtually, geographically, to allow people to gather and connect, and then you go from there. But those spaces are hard to come by. And so talking about burnout was important to us because, not only to allow people to tell their personal perspectives, which is, like we talked about earlier, always needed, but to also explore the systemic role that capitalism plays on our mental health. For a long time, a lot of people, like, there are, chemical imbalances that can exist within people and whatnot. But for the most part, people are finding out that it is just living under constant anxiety of having to pay bills or starve, or that you'll get sick and won't be able to pay your medical bills or whatever it is, that you really, as a human being, as a living thing, this is an artificial stressor that's been put on us by a system, right? And that's okay. It's not okay. We're trying to change it, but it's not you. It's kind of like this very human reaction to living this really kind of strained life.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give to people if they were starting their own podcast?
Get help from friends. So build a team around you so the workload is shared and, you just feel like you've got people to lean on and have a little more confidence in what you have to say in your voice. I know that was what I struggled with. I talked as little as possible, didn't see value in my voice, and I think I found it a little bit. So, yeah, that would be my two, because technical advice, you'd have to talk to my producer for that.
That would be an interesting chat at some point, if possible. But what podcast do you listen to yourself? Do you enjoy listening to podcasts, and what do you like listening to?
I'll be honest, I don't consume a lot of podcasts. I've got two small children, so my ears are often filled with a cacophony of noise. That's why I lit up and I was like, that's your secret. You're in a van with headphones or whatever, and you can just sit and listen. And I miss that time. I know it will come again. But when my headphones are on, I'm usually recording in the studio. But there are a few that I have loaded on my reminder. They just come in my ear. And so I just want to give one a shout out because
there is a podcast for kids, but there are podcasts for kids, by the way.
Are there?
Yes. What is it? The Old Man in the Boat. That's a short series. That's a short series. I think there's about 10 episodes, and they're about 10 minutes each, I think.
Oh, that's about their attention span. That would be good.
So it's educational. I think it's a British podcast, but it's interesting. It's very well produced, and it's like a story. And each time the old man in the boat comes across something new, and it's sort of like explaining what this something new is, or so a seagull will approach, and they'll be talking to the seagull, and it's weird, but there you go.
There's a niche for everyone, but The Warrior Life with Pam Palmater. It's about Indigenous activism and other things being done in the movement there. And I'm a big fan of hers. So when she started sharing this content, I definitely set a reminder. So I download that episode whenever it comes up. Okay. I saw you making notes.
You saw me writing that one down.
Call Pam. Yeah. She's probably a very busy person. This is probably one of the smaller bits that she does, but it's definitely worth a listen.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as you said about the Indigenous and that, I had to go, right, I'll have a listen to that. That's fascinating. So where can people get hold of you and find the show?
So we are on almost every podcast streaming app that we could connect with. So all your usual suspects. We do load a lot of our content onto YouTube at BP of Disruption. That's our tag on Instagram and Twitter. We're also on Facebook, but all of our content typically goes up on our RSS feed. With some bonus stuff ending up on YouTube once in a while. Okay. And you can email us at bpofdisruption@gmail.com if you want to be a guest.
That's great. Thank you very much. Or if you want to send any questions or something to Jessa, because I'm sure that she'll answer them if you ask her some questions.
For sure. A lot of my episodes have been booked by people who've seen actions or groups, and you have to talk to these people. And so I have to talk to those people. I try to keep the audience happy that way.
And if you know anybody that Jessa doesn't know that, is involved in activism that you think Jessa needs to speak to or check out.
Absolutely. I would love the attention there. The more, the merrier.
Okay. Thank you for speaking with me today, Jessa.
Thank you, Marv. I had a blast.
Me too. Anyway, you can find Pods Like Us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. I don't normally say it that way. That's why I looked a bit weird. And you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us. If I take a photograph of this picture of us talking, do you want to keep your anonymity, or do you not mind me posting it with the eventual episode when it comes out?
Oh, no, that's fine. My face is kind of out there.
Okay. Because I know that a lot of people involved in, like the anonymity, like Noodle, which, I can understand, really.
Absolutely. And I kind of, when I did that episode, it was this realization where, and we talk about that, if you're out there, then at least, use your imagery as a beacon, like for a purpose. But there's a lot of work that can still be done, and you can retain some anonymity in some spaces. But when I'm talking about my podcast, that's already a done deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I know someone, was it Noodle or was it somebody else, was talking about on one of your episodes Rage Against the Machine as a band or something that they listened to. And
yeah,
go on.
I like to ask people where they were politicized or how they were politicized, because not everybody is kind of cognizant of what's going on and the need to fight back and, organize. So I'm always curious to find out. And usually it's a person. But for Noodle, it was music from their youth. And yeah, like Rage obviously is probably up there for a few people in terms of a moment of enlightenment. I hate to say woke now because I feel it's a label that's used against us, but that's kind of what it is, right? When you're politicized in a good way.
Well, my first show I recorded today was with Chris from the Walking Tall podcast.
Oh, very cool.
When I was listening to the episode where he was discussing his own history and his own trauma, he mentioned Rage Against the Machine there. So when he came onto the chat, I was playing some Rage Against the Machine on my bass guitar for him.
Nice. Trying to set the mood
For him. And yeah, he said, "Oh," he goes, "Oh," and then I said, "Yeah, I saw them at Wembley Arena when they were on the Battle of Los Angeles tour. Incredible concert."
Yeah, it's maybe not too rare anymore. We're kind of moving in a different direction, but music is a form of activism in itself, right? And everyone has a talent to play in the movement, and musicians, they got to make music. So when they use those platforms to say their truth and speak truth to power, it's incredibly impactful versus, just singing about a lovely day or maybe a love song. I'm always kind of more keen to the folks that have something a little harder to say. I guess there's space for everything, but
I shouldn't keep on the music thing, because people point out that when I go into music on my show, I get carried away with it. Because otherwise I could say, if you go back, you'll go back to people like, Gil Scott-Heron, and you'll have, Gil Scott-Heron, Sly and the Family Stone. A lot of their songs were about, rights and about, black rights and the difference between black and white and those things. And who else have you got? Even Miles Davis in the 70s was very much for that sort of thing. And, you could go back to all of these people, the last poets as well, who were, a lot of people don't realize, probably the first, essential rap artist, or at least artists that used poetic, writing in their songs. But I'm digressing and going on
Well, it's a form of storytelling, but you would like to talk about music. I'm game for a little bit here as well, because part of what the show does, the Blueprints of Disruption, is, along with all kinds of other things, but is to find ways to make movements, political movements, activist movements, sustainable, joyful. And sometimes that involves music. Like you think of all the other things you need to do as an activist, like all the boxes you have to check and the power levers you have to pull and the fight. And sometimes we forget that people also have to have a good time while they're in this critical fight, right? While they're battling it out and can be kind of dreary, and we all work too. And so, yeah, like we like to explore the different ways people lift themselves up. And, some of people's favorites moments during protests, during direct actions are when the drums play, or there's a particular song everyone sings together. And it can seem superficial, like a kind of afterthought, but they create these memories and solidarity moments that, are critical to working into activism.
Yeah, it's like you get far enough back, even back to the 60s, probably the late 50s, and you've got the Seegers, with the "We Shall Not Be Moved," which was the big activism song that people used to sing at some rallies back in those days.
Yeah. I think every generation probably has a few, anthems that speak to the struggles of the moment. It seems more so in the past than now. Maybe we have different avenues of expression. Who knows? But, it's definitely part of disrupting the status quo, right? Giving people those perspectives that they don't normally hear, like, can you swear on your chat? Like,
yeah, we're not in the actual main body of the show yet, but yeah.
Okay. Well,
I might pull some bits into the show. Actually.
Like, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me.
Yes. Yep.
Like, people aren't used to hearing that. It shakes you up a little bit.
Especially when it's number one on the charts in the UK.
Yeah, I remember a school dance where they were explicitly told, like, okay, play whatever you want, don't play that. And then obviously the last song that the student DJ puts on was that. And, the whole student body's screaming it as loud as they can just because this is like the one time they can get away with it. And it was glorious.
We used to have a thing with the band I was in where we'd play probably one Rage Against the Machine song in our set. And this is really bad, really. So we played this one gig in a pub in Nottinghamshire, and we were there. And then so we did the one Rage Against the Machine song because of the language, essentially. In the first half of the set, and then we all decided to go for a drink, and I don't need to stay. I stay sober when I used to do gigs, so I'd have like a coffee or a tea, and the others would drink alcohol. But we're there, and then the landlord said, "Oh, we don't want any more swearing in any of your set, on any of your second half of your set, because." Just don't. And it didn't really work because then another member of the band, because we all sang, all three of us did, me, the drummer, and the guitarist. And so the guitarist looked at me, and when the landlord said that, he looked at me and he gave me this look, and it was like, all right, okay. So we sat down, and then he's got a piece of paper and a pen, and he changes the entire second half of the set. So we've got 5 or 6 more Rage Against the Machine songs in that half. And we were never able
5 or 6 more
Rage Against the Machine songs that we did.
You end up a tribute band.
We got banned for life from playing in that pub ever again.
Oh, well, kind of a badge of honor, but not if you need to pay the bills with your gigs, I suppose. But, it reminds me of that song, You Ain't Done Nothing If You've Not Been Called a Red. It's almost like you're not really worth nothing if you've not been kicked out of somewhere,
Absolutely.
Conforming a little too much.
You need to rebel, even if it's just against people saying, no, you can't do that.
Yeah,
we can.
Just because kids do it all the time, right? They're
Just
half
a bit of the
asleep. Go to
child
bed.
coming out.
No.
No matter how old you are, you have to let that bit of a child come out at times.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Where would we be without it?
No, I won't go to bed at this time.
Yeah. One eye open.
That's right. They've shut the door and they don't know I'm still awake.
I can't leave until they're like snoring or, I'm sure I don't get away with it. Gotta test the water.